She arrived at that secluded farmstead with an old travel bag and an 8-month belly. No one was waiting for her. She had no destination and carried within her 2 children whom their own father refused to acknowledge. The man who swore to stay by her side vanished one ordinary morning, like someone who goes out to buy salt and never returns. And when Adana pushed open that creaking wooden gate and saw the lean, solitary white goat penned in the corral, bleating for a kid that was no longer there, she understood, without anyone having to explain. Both had been abandoned by those who should have stayed, and it was in that forgotten farmstead, nestled between the bushland and the silence, that everything began to change. If you've ever felt like life pushed you to a place that seemed like the end, but ended up being exactly the beginning of everything, comment below where you're watching this from. Write your city and state, because this story was made to reach people where it's needed. Like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next stories. In the village compounds, in earlier times, stories like these were told among rivers and dusty paths. Adana was 23 years old and possessed that quiet way of existing known only to those who learned to fend for themselves early on. She was not a woman to make a scene or to demand what the world did not offer willingly. Her maternal grandmother, Mama Ngozi, a woman with calloused hands and a heart as vast as the compound where she raised her chickens and sold akara every market day, had raised her. Adana's mother died of fever when she was still a 4-year-old child, one of those fevers that arrived without warning in the countryside and left, taking people with them. Her father was never more than a name no one spoke, because Mama Ngozi said that a man who flees from his child does not deserve the effort of being remembered. The girl grew up between the market and the hearth, learning to sew with scraps, to season beans with little, and to size up people with a glance before listening to what they said. Mama Ngozi had that gift of teaching without sermons, only by example, and Adana absorbed everything with that quiet intelligence that goes unnoticed until the day someone needs it. When her grandmother passed away, Adana had just turned 20, and the pain of that loss was the kind that makes no noise. It simply settles in the chest and changes the color of every morning that follows. God had taken the only person she had in the world, and Adana remained standing because Mama Ngozi had never taught her any other posture. Alone, with no relatives appearing and no land of her own, she began working as a washerwoman and seamstress in the village households. She slept in a small room at the back of a cheap lodge that charged little and offered less, saving coin by coin with the discipline of one who knows the world, gives nothing freely to those without a prominent family name. She lived thus, balanced on that thin line between dignity and destitution, until the day Chinedu appeared in her life, and he appeared in the way problems often do when they masquerade as solutions. Chinedu was the son of a prosperous farmer from the region, a young man in a fine agbada and polished shoes who appeared in the village every week with the air of one who owned a piece of the world. He had an easy smile, smooth conversation, and the self-assurance of a man who knows exactly what to say to a woman who hasn't heard kind words in far too long. Adana was not foolish, but she was lonely in a way that hurt to the bone. And loneliness has that invisible malice of making one see water where there is only a mirage. Chinedu courted her with calculated patience. He would appear with wild flowers at the lodge door, wait for her outside the houses where she worked, and spoke of a future with a conviction that almost deceived even himself. The relationship lasted as long as such things do, when one of the two is lying from the start. Adana gave herself because she believed, and she believed because she needed to believe that God had not taken everything from her without leaving anything in its place. When the pregnancy came, the village doctor examined her carefully and said it was twins. Adana felt the ground open and close at the same time because it was terrifying and beautiful, to an extent she couldn't separate. She left the doctor's office with a hand on her belly, which was not yet very noticeable, and went to look for Chinedu to tell him, already imagining his face, already rehearsing her smile, already building in her head a scene that never happened. Chinedu's house was closed, windows without curtains. The compound swept clean of any trace. The door locked with the silence of a place no one intends to return to. A neighbor, with that compassion disguised as gossip that exists in every small village, told her he had left 3 days earlier to marry a merchant's daughter from another region, a family arrangement agreed upon months ago. All the while he was swearing his love under the tree by the lodge, he already had a bride waiting in a neighboring village. Adana heard this standing with her hand on her belly and did not cry in front of anyone, because Mama Ngozi had taught her that tears in front of others become currency for pity. The following months carried a weight that went beyond her growing belly, in a village where everyone knew everyone. A pregnant and solitary woman carries on her back a judgment that no one verbalizes aloud, but that is heard in every glance, in every calculated silence, when she enters a shop, in every conversation that dies when she passes by. The mistress of the house where Adana worked the most, a woman of rigid posture and unyielding opinion, dismissed her one Monday morning with a coldness that hurt more than any shout. She said that a girl in such a state could no longer serve in that house, that the neighbors were talking, and that she had her own reputation to protect. And so, one by one, the doors that sustained Adana closed. With 8 months of pregnancy, jobless, without income, the money for the lodge dwindling, and 2 children stirring inside her, as if already in a hurry to arrive in the world, Adana made the only decision left to her. She packed Mama Ngozi's old leather travel bag. Inside, she put 2 changes of clothes, the hand-woven mat her grandmother had made, her sewing scissors, and a small bottle of oil she used for her belly. She left the lodge door one morning, the sky still dark, without telling anyone, without looking back, because looking back would have required a courage she was saving entirely for what lay ahead. She walked all morning along the dusty path, at the slow pace her belly allowed, stopping when her body demanded it. Sitting on stones by the roadside, with the bag in her lap and her hands on her belly, feeling the children stir as if wanting to help their mother decide which way to go. She knocked on 3 doors along the way. At the first, the woman saw her belly and closed the door without opening her mouth. At the second, a man said he couldn't help and went inside. At the third, an elderly woman brought her a glass of water and a piece of yam, flour, bread, but made it clear with downcast eyes that her house was already full of its own problems. Adana drank the water, ate the bread standing on the roadside, thanked her, and continued, because continuing was the only direction that existed. Evening fell with that weight, known only to country evenings, a heat that sticks to the skin and makes the air feel solid. Crickets were already singing before the sun set, and Adana continued on the path with a slowness that was no longer a choice, it was the body's limit. She no longer cried. Not because she was well, but because she had reached that point where even crying expends energy that simply isn't left. Only the sound of her own steps on the earth remained, the rustle of the wind in the trees, and that question pushing at the back of her head every time she tried to stand up. And now, as the sun began to set on the horizon, painting everything in that golden hue of late afternoon, she saw it, half hidden among the trees, a roof. The path curved at that stretch, and a little off the main route, along a dirt track with old cart marks, the farmstead appeared. It wasn't large or flashy, a house with sturdy walls, closed windows, and a covered veranda in front, surrounded by a compacted earth compound. It wasn't in the best condition, that was clear, but it stood, and it looked habitable, like a place someone had recently left, still holding the warmth of having been lived in. There was a laden mango tree beside the house, a guava tree in one corner of the compound, and at the back, a wooden fenced corral, where a white goat moved restlessly, letting out bleats that cut through the evening silence with an urgency that seemed like a plea. Adana placed her bag on the ground and stood watching the goat as if the two were recognizing something in each other that needed no explanation. The animal was lean, with visibly full and swollen udders, which meant it had recently given birth and someone should be milking it, but wasn't. It bleated, looking around as if searching for something. And Adana understood before she thought. It was searching for its kid. A milking goat without its kid by its side is a mother who has lost her young or had them torn away. And that bleat was not a bleat of hunger. It was the bleat of one separated from its own blood. Adana felt her eyes sting in a way that had nothing to do with the fatigue of the journey. She placed both hands over her belly, where her children stirred, and looked at that animal bleeding alone in a corral. And she thought that perhaps God had a strange way of bringing the abandoned together, of pushing one towards the other so that none would be completely alone. She entered the compound slowly, found the well with water, found the house door unlocked, found rooms with simple furniture still in place. She returned to the corral, filled a bucket with water from the well, and took it to the goat, who drank with a heart-wrenching anxiety. Afterward, she went to the mango tree, cut 2 ripe fruits that fell almost on their own, sat on the veranda of the house with her back against the wall, and ate right there, letting the juice run down her chin, without caring, because the sweetness of that mango, after an entire day of walking, had a flavor that went beyond ripe fruit. It tasted of providence. That night, Adana found an iron bed in one of the rooms, with a thin straw mattress that was still usable. She lay down with her bag beside her, feeling the twins still for the first time that day, as if they too knew they had arrived somewhere. Through the window opening, a patch of sky full of stars entered, more stars than she saw in the village, because there was no light competing with them. From the corral, The goat's bleating still came occasionally, softer now, as if the presence of someone on the farmstead had calmed something in her too. Adana didn't know who owned the land, didn't know if she could stay, didn't know what dawn would bring, but there, in that instant, with her body exhausted and her children still within her, she fell asleep, and it was the first full sleep she had had in weeks, as if that farmstead, with all its mysteries, had decided to protect her before she even asked. What Adana did not yet know was that that farmstead held a story as heavy as her own, that the goat in the corral was the last vestige of a life that had collapsed within those walls, and that the owner of that land, a man named Segun, had not abandoned the place out of neglect, but out of a grief he could no longer face. But she would only discover that when the silence of that farmstead began to reveal its secrets, one by one, like the earth reveals the seeds it kept in the darkness. The second day on the farmstead began with the goat's bleating. Adana opened her eyes before the sun, her body aching from the poor night on the straw mattress, and the twins already awake within her, moving with the restlessness of those in a hurry to exist. She lay for a moment, looking at the room's ceiling, listening to the bleating from the corral, and trying to organize in her head what she needed to do. The list was long and her body was tired, but Adana had learned long ago that waiting for tiredness to pass was a luxury for those who had someone to wait with. She got up, washed her face with water from the well, and went straight to the corral, because before taking care of herself, she needed to take care of that animal that had been there, God knows how long, alone. The goat greeted her with a softer bleat, different from the desperation of the previous evening, as if it already recognized that someone had returned to pay attention to it. Adana filled the feeder with water, pulled fresh grass from around the corral, and put it inside for the animal to eat. Then she stood looking at the swollen udders and understood that she needed to milk, because a goat not milked in time suffers and gets sick. She had seen Mama Ngozi do that with a neighbor's goat years ago, and stored the gesture in her memory, as she stored everything her grandmother did, with the attention of one who knows she will need it someday. She sat beside the animal, rested her forehead on its furry flank, and milked slowly, her hands clumsy at first, until the thick, warm milk began to flow into a pot she found hanging on the fence. The goat remained still throughout the milking, with a meekness that seemed like gratitude. And when Adana finished and stood up with the full pot, the animal nudged its muzzle against her arm and stayed there for a moment, with the simplicity animals have for expressing gratitude without complication. Adana took the milk, inside, drank a cup, and felt the warm liquid go down her throat with a thick, sweet taste that, at that moment, was the best thing she had ever tasted. She looked at the half-full pot and thought of the children who were yet to come, and she thought of the milk, and she thought that perhaps God had not forgotten her, but had simply sent help by a path she never would have expected. That morning, Adana explored the farmstead with new eyes. No longer the eyes of one seeking refuge for a night, but those of one who needed to understand what this place had to offer. The house was simple, with thick, sturdy walls, 3 rooms, a kitchen with a wood-burning hearth, and a veranda at the front facing the compound. It wasn't in perfect condition. It had a window with loose wood and a leak in the corner of the smallest room, but it was habitable, it was solid, it was more than she had anywhere else in the world. The compound had the large mango tree laden with fruit, the guava tree, a plantain patch at the back with a bunch beginning to yellow, and near the well, a lemongrass plant that grew without asking permission, releasing that clean scent that Mama Ngozi said was a remedy for almost everything. There was also a small wooden shed, with a sliding door leaned against one side of the house, where she found old tools, coiled rope, a ladder, and a hammock stored inside a jute sack. But it was at the back, next to the corral, where Adana paused. There were the remains of a garden with furrows delimited by stones, overgrown with weeds, but still with its visible shape in the ground. And within one of the furrows, stubbornly living without any care, a patch of spring onions and another of coriander had spread on their own, sprouting with the tenacity of things that refuse to die. Adana knelt there with difficulty due to her belly and ran her fingers over the coriander leaves, which released a strong, vibrant scent. There was something in those plants surviving in a place everyone had left behind that spoke directly to something within her. The earth had not given up, even when the people did. And if the earth wouldn't give up, neither would she. On the 3rd day, a visitor arrived. Adana was trying to light the hearth with some dry sticks she had gathered in the compound, when she heard footsteps in the yard, firm steps of someone who knew the ground they walked on. She rose slowly, went to the kitchen door, and saw a woman standing in the middle of the compound, looking at her with an expression that mixed surprise and a curiosity she made no effort to conceal. She was a woman in her late 60s, her face marked by the sun, white hair pulled back tightly in a bun, a straw hat on her head, and a cloth bag hanging from her arm. She had small, watchful eyes that seemed to miss no detail of what she was seeing, and a bearing of one who carried authority without needing to announce it. The woman said her name was Iya Alake. She lived about 2 kilometers away, along the bush path that cut through the forest, and had come because she saw smoke rising in the direction of the farmstead the day before, and wanted to know what was happening, because no smoke had risen from that farmstead for over a year. She said it with the objectivity of one who doesn't need to beat around the bush to ask what she wants, and waited for the answer with the patience of one who has all day. Adana responded with the same frankness, because she had no energy to embellish anything. She said she had arrived 2 days earlier, that she was taking refuge, that she didn't know who owned the property, and that she hadn't touched anything that wasn't necessary for survival. Iya Alake listened without interruption, lowered her eyes to the 8-month belly, returned her gaze to Adana's face, and remained there for a moment, measuring something only she knew. Then, without saying anything, she entered the kitchen, opened her bag, and took out a package of corn flour, a piece of smoked fish, a jar of dark honey, and a bunch of herbs tied with twine. She placed everything on the counter with the naturalness of one replenishing a pantry, and she said that the hearth lit better if the thinner kindling was placed below and the thicker pieces on top, and that the cupboard drawer had matches stored inside a jar she herself had left there months ago. Adana stood looking at this woman who had arrived unbidden, had listened without judgment, and had solved the problem of the coffee before anyone asked, and felt a lump rise in her throat that wasn't sadness. It was the enormous relief of someone who discovers they are not completely alone in the world. Iya Alake stayed all that morning. She taught Adana how to light the hearth correctly. They made coffee with roasted corn flour. She walked around the farmstead, commenting on what she saw with the precision of one who understands land and village life. She said the well was good, that the house structure was firm, that the leak in the small room was easily fixed with a readjusted roof tile. She said the lemongrass in the compound was a holy remedy for the last months of pregnancy, that it calmed back pains and helped one sleep when the weight of the belly wouldn't allow it. She said all this with the same naturalness with which she had spoken of the hearth, with no hint of doing a favor, no shadow of pity in her eyes, only with the practical wisdom of one who has seen much in this world and knows that most people's suffering doesn't need advice, it needs companionship. It was before leaving that Iya Alake told Adana about the farmstead, and Adana listened with her heart tightening at each sentence. The property belonged to a man named Segun. He had inherited it from his parents and had lived there with his wife Funmilayo for 8 years of a marriage that the entire neighborhood considered blessed. They had both built that farmstead together, brick by brick, furrow by furrow, and the white goat Adana now cared for had been a gift from Segun to Funmilayo on their first wedding anniversary. Iya Alake recounted that Funmilayo called the goat Serena because she was the meekest and most peaceful animal they had ever seen, and that when Serena gave birth to a kid, Funmilayo cared for it as if it were her own child, because the real children, the ones they so longed for, were not coming. Adana already felt the weight of what was coming before Iya Alake finished. Funmilayo finally became pregnant after years of trying, and the joy in that house was of a magnitude that only those who have waited long can measure. But the birth went wrong. It went wrong in a way that even the experience of Iya Alake, who had been a local midwife for decades, could not reverse. Funmilayo died in that very house, in the back room, and the baby did not survive. Segun was shattered in a way that went beyond normal grief. He was left as men are left who built their entire lives around a person and suddenly find themselves in a house where every corner reminds them of what no longer exists. Segun's brother came to find him 2 weeks later and took him to the city. Segun left without resistance, like someone who no longer has any will of their own to offer. Before leaving, he asked a neighbor to take care of what was left on the farmstead. The neighbor sold the chickens, sold Serena's kid, because it had commercial value and was easy to transport. But the mother goat stayed because she had an infected hoof that prevented her from walking well, and the neighbor promised to come back for her later. He never did. Serena remained locked in the corral, surviving on grass that grew between the fence cracks and rainwater that collected in the trough, with her udder full of milk that no one milked and bleating for a kid that had been taken away forever. Iya Alake would occasionally pass by to throw her water and grass over the fence, but age and distance allowed her no more than that. She had done what she could and prayed to God to send someone. Adana listened, sitting on the veranda bench, her hands on her belly and her eyes burning. She thought of that goat who had lost her kid and carried milk without anyone to give it to. She thought of herself, pregnant with twins, about to be a mother, without a drop of certainty about tomorrow. And she thought that there was a meeting there that neither of them had planned, neither she nor the animal, but that bore the mark of those things that seem like chance but are not. Iya Alake, as if reading her mind, told her before leaving that Segun had not appeared for over a year, that he paid the land tax by mail, but never again set foot on the farmstead, and that for now, Adana was safer there than anywhere else. She said that, and walked down the bush path with the calm steps of one who knows every stone on the way, leaving behind the scent of herbs and the feeling that something had been sown in that conversation. The days that followed were filled with work. Adana could not stay still, and her body, though heavy at 8 months, obeyed her will to work with a resistance that surprised even herself. She cleaned the house room by room, not because it was in a state of complete abandonment, but because it had that dust of a closed place that needs a living hand to awaken. She washed the floor, opened the windows for the wind to enter, fixed the loose wood with nails she found in a pot in the corner of the kitchen. She readjusted the roof tile that caused the leak with the help of the old ladder leaned against the back, climbing with the care her belly demanded, and descending with the relief of one who had solved a problem with her own hands. The kitchen received special attention because that was where the life of the farmstead revolved, and the wood-burning hearth, following Iya Alake's instructions, began to light on the first try every morning. Iya Alake returned 2 days later, as if they had agreed, though they had agreed nothing. She brought beans, a piece of smoked cheese wrapped in cloth, and a mint plant with roots in a clod of earth. She said that mint was the first thing to plant in a new garden, because it took root easily, repelled insects, and made a tea that solved half of the body's ailments. They planted the mint together beside the coriander and spring onion plants that Adana had cleared in the previous days, and Iya Alake approved with a nod of her head the work that had been done in the house. It was during these visits, between working in the garden and drinking lemongrass tea, sitting on the veranda, that Adana gradually recounted her story, not all at once, not with drama, but in the way true things emerge when a person can no longer bear to carry them alone. And Iya Alake listened with that silence that is the opposite of emptiness, a silence full of presence, of attention, of a wisdom that knows that most of the world's pain doesn't need an opinion, it needs a witness. The routine began to take shape, as everything takes shape when repeated with intention. Adana woke with the first light, milked Serena, made coffee, tended the garden. She worked in the house. The goat had become a constant companion, following Adana around the compound when let loose, nudging her belly with an insistence that was a mix of tenderness and instinct. Serena's milk was thick and good, and Adana learned from Iya Alake to make fresh cheese that lasted 2 days and, along with the flour and fruits from the compound, formed the sustenance of those days. The garden began to respond to the care with a generosity that seemed to want to compensate for lost time, and life on that farmstead slowly organized itself with the patience that good things demand. Slowly, without promise, but with firmness. It was in the second week that Adana first heard the sound of a caravan on the path. A trader was passing by with 6 donkeys laden with goods, making his way between villages, as men of that trade did, carrying merchandise from one place to another along bush paths only they knew. The man stopped at the entrance to the farmstead and asked permission to water his animals at the well. Adana saw him from the compound and went to the front. He was a man in his late 30s, perhaps older, with broad shoulders, a face weathered by the sun and the road, large, calloused hands, of one who spends his life gripping rope and reins. He had a quiet manner that wasn't rudeness. It was simply the way of one accustomed to living more with animals than with people. He said his name was Emeka, and that he passed through that stretch every 2 or 3 weeks, carrying cargo to the villages in the region. Adana gave him permission for the donkeys to drink and stayed nearby while the animals rested. Emeka looked around with the discreet attention of one who assesses a place by what it reveals, not by what it pretends. He saw the well-tended garden, the house with open windows, the goat grazing freely in the compound. He looked at Adana with her 8-month belly and asked nothing that wasn't about the water and the path. And in that silent respect of not invading what didn't belong to him, there was something Adana registered without knowing how to name it. Before leaving, he asked if she needed anything from the village. Adana said she didn't, and he nodded and continued with his caravan. And the donkey's hooves disappeared into the dust of the path until silence returned. Iya Alake, who learned of the visit the next morning, as she learned of everything that happened within a 20 kilometers radius, told her she knew Emeka. He was a widower. His wife had died some years ago from a slow illness that gradually took her, and since then, he had lived on the road, moving from village to village, without settling anywhere. sleeping at traders' stops, and waking before dawn to continue his journey. Iya Alake said this in the tone of one merely informing, with no ulterior motive behind her words. But Adana perceived in the old midwife's eyes a discreet spark of one paying attention to what God was arranging without anyone asking. But it was in that same conversation that Iya Alake brought other news, and that came with a different weight. There was a wealthy landowner in the region named Chief Obinna, a man of money and influence, owner of a large store and lands bordering Segun's farmstead. Iya Alake recounted that Chief Obinna had had his eye on that property for years, that he had made purchase offers at least twice, and that Segun had rejected both without explanation. She said that Chief Obinna was not a man to accept a no calmly, and that since the news of a woman living on the farmstead began to circulate in the village, he had been asking questions about the situation, about who Adana was, about what right she had to be there. Iya Alake told everything in the low, firm voice of one who is not spreading gossip but giving a warning, and ended by saying that Adana should be careful because a man with money and ambition was the most dangerous combination that existed in the countryside. Adana listened and filed it away. She had other, more immediate urgencies. The twins were getting heavier and heavier. Back pains were constant, and Iya Alake, who examined her belly with the expert hands of one who had brought more than 100 children into the world, said that the time was approaching, that it could be a matter of weeks or less. Adana's body seemed to agree because everything became slower, heavier, more difficult. But she did not stop, because stopping was a luxury, and because manual labor was the only remedy she knew for the fear that grew within her in the same proportion as her belly. The fear of giving birth alone, the fear of not being able to manage too, the fear of losing this roof before she had anything she could call her own. Emeka passed by the farmstead again 2 weeks later, as he had said he would. This time, without being asked, he brought a small sack of salt, a roll of twine, and a packet of pumpkin seeds that he said he had been given at a shop and that were of no use to him on the road. He left everything on the veranda with the economy of gestures of one who does good without fanfare. He watered the donkeys, exchanged a few words with Adana about the weather and the road, and continued his journey. But before leaving, he looked towards the corral where Serena grazed peacefully and said, almost as if talking to himself, that it was good to see that farmstead alive again. And he left without waiting for an answer, because men of that type don't wait, they just say and go. Adana remained on the veranda, watching the caravan move away, and felt, without wanting to feel, without being prepared to feel, that something about that quiet man with large hands left a presence on the farmstead that lasted longer than his visit. She shook off the thought like one shakes dust from clothes and returned to the garden, because she had no time or space in her life to harbor that kind of feeling. Not now, not with 2 children on the way and a roof that wasn't hers. But the thought remained there, quietly in a corner she pretended not to know, waiting for the right moment to return. And that night, as she milked Serena under the first stars, with warm milk falling into the pot and the twins moving as if dancing inside her, Adana thought of everything that had happened since she left the door of that lodge with her bag in hand. She thought of the journey, of the closed doors, of the goat that bleated alone, of the milk that now sustained her and sustained the life growing within her. And she thought that perhaps life had not finished punishing her, but that perhaps, just perhaps, it was only just beginning to ask for her forgiveness. What she didn't know was that Chief Obinna had already made a decision, and that the next time a horse stopped in front of that farmstead, it would not be bringing seeds or water for the donkeys. Chief Obinna appeared one Wednesday afternoon without warning, mounted on a well-kept horse and accompanied by a younger man who followed silently. He was a man in his 50s, with the belly of one who eats well and without haste, a wide-brimmed hat, and the kind of smile that arrives before the person and is already sizing up the situation. He entered the property as if he were entering his own land. He dismounted his horse with the calm assurance of one who is certain the world works as he wishes. And he walked to the veranda where Adana was sitting, mending one of the clothes she had brought in her bag. He introduced himself by name and merchant title, as if that were a letter of introduction that would open any door, and began to speak of the farmstead with a familiarity that did not belong to him, commenting on the fence, the compound, the quality of the land, with the tone of one evaluating merchandise before making an offer. Adana did not rise from her seat. She continued sewing with a steady needle and her eyes on the fabric, listening to every word with that attention. Mama Ngozi had taught her the attention of one who doesn't need to look to see. Chief Obinna spoke of the farmstead for a few minutes, praised the work she had done in the compound and the house, and then got to his point with the subtlety of cattle passing through a narrow gate. He said that Segun was thinking of selling the property, that negotiations were underway, and that when the sale was finalized, she would, naturally, have to vacate the premises. He said it with a smile that tried to appear friendly, but which held a cold calculation beneath it, and waited for her reaction, like one throwing a stone into a river and watching the ripples. Adana finished the stitch she was making, cut the thread with her sewing scissors, folded the fabric in her lap, and raised her eyes to him for the first time. She asked if Segun had told him this personally. The question was simple, but it carried a weight Chief Obinna did not expect, because it was the question of one who knows how to distinguish truth from maneuver. The man hesitated for a second, just 1 second, but Adana saw it. He said they had recently conversed, that things were moving in that direction. Adana replied that when Segun came personally to tell her that, the conversation would continue. Until then, there was nothing more to discuss. Chief Obinna's smile lasted an instant too long, one of those smiles that lingers on the face after it has lost its reason, and then it faded. He looked at her with different eyes, recalculating something internally, and said she was a woman of strong opinions. He said it as if it were a defect. He mounted his horse and left with a young man behind him, and Adana remained on the veranda with her, sewing in her lap and her heart beating faster than she let on. That same night, as she milked Serena by the light of a kerosene lamp she had found in the pantry, Adana felt true fear for the first time. Not the fear of the road, which was the fear of having nowhere to go. This was different. It was the fear of having found a place and someone wanting to take it away. It was the fear of one who had begun to take root and felt the earth tremble beneath her. Serena, as if sensing something, leaned her body against Adana's arm and stayed there with that gentle presence that was her way of saying she was with her. Adana finished milking in silence. She took the milk inside, stored it in the coolness of the pantry, and went to lie down with her hand on her belly, quietly asking God to give her at least a little more time on that farmstead before the world decided to exact its toll again. Iya Alake learned of Chief Obinna's visit before the sun rose the next day, because in the countryside news travels faster than a horse, and she appeared at the farmstead with the expression of one prepared for a serious conversation. She sat on the veranda with Adana, drank the coffee that was already ready, and said what needed to be said. That Chief Obinna had lied, that Segun had not authorized any sale, that she knew this because Segun's own brother lived in the same village Iya Alake visited once a month to sell cheese at the market, and that if there had been any movement towards a sale, the brother would have mentioned it. Chief Obinna was pressuring on his own, betting that a pregnant, solitary woman would not have the courage to resist. Iya Alake said this with a contained indignation that was more powerful than any shout. And then she said she would send word to Segun's brother so he would know what Chief Obinna was doing. The following weeks were filled with a tension that ran beneath the surface, like hidden river water. Chief Obinna did not return personally, but began to act through other means, spreading rumors in the village that there was an intruder on Segun's farmstead, that the situation was irregular, that the property was being occupied by a stranger. The gossip reached Adana through Iya Alake's visits, who relayed it with concern, and at the same time, with a cold anger of one who knows the game and does not accept it being played against the weak. One morning, Adana found the entrance gate to the farmstead scratched with some sharp object, a small but deliberate mark, the kind that doesn't happen by accident. She looked at that mark and felt her stomach tighten because she knew it was a message, and messages of that kind do not come alone. Emeka appeared that same week at his usual time with his caravan of donkeys and the calm step of one who has no fixed schedule with the world. Adana saw him arrive from the garden where she was working and felt, before any thought, a relief that came from deep within her chest, as if the presence of that man brought with it a security she had not asked for, but needed more than she would admit. Emeka watered the donkeys, sat on the veranda bench. Adana had cleaned and restored and accepted the coffee she prepared for him without his asking. They stayed there for a while, he sitting and she standing at the kitchen door, in a silence that was anything but empty. It was the kind of silence where two people stay together because the presence of the other already says what needs to be said, and speaking would almost be an interruption. It was that day that Adana noted Emeka's gaze at the mark on the gate when he arrived. He said nothing, asked nothing, but before leaving, after having stayed longer than usual, he said he would start passing by every week instead of every 2 weeks, because that stretch of road needed more attention. He said it as if it were about the road. Adana heard it as if it were about the road, but both knew it wasn't about the road. And there was in that unspoken a kindness that was more significant than any declaration, because it was the kindness of protecting without invading, of being close without imposing, of caring without demanding recognition. During that visit, Emeka brought 2 kilograms of rice and a pot of cooking fat that he said he had received as payment for a delivery. He left it on the veranda beside the bench and didn't expect thanks because he was not a man to expect anything from the world. But when he left, and the hooves of the donkeys disappeared around the bend in the road, Adana held the pot of cooking fat in her hands and felt a warmth in her chest that she already knew, that she had felt before, and that the other time had been a lie. But this time was different. It was different because Emeka promised nothing, swore nothing, embellished nothing with words he didn't intend to keep. He simply appeared, did what he could, and left. And in that simplicity, there was a truth that Adana, after all that Chinedu had done to her, recognized as the rarest and most valuable thing that existed. If you're wishing Adana succeeds in protecting all she has built, like now, and share this story with anyone who also believes that starting over is possible. The days grew shorter, and Adana's body became heavier in a way that changed every gesture, every step, every breath. Iya Alake now came almost every day, checking her belly with firm hands and a pressed ear, and said that both were well positioned, that the moment was approaching, that it could be any day. Adana felt it in her body before hearing it from the midwife, because there was a new urgency in the twins' movements, a restlessness that seemed like haste. She kept working because she knew no other way to live, but she went slower, stopped more often, breathed deeply, leaning against the kitchen wall with her hands on her back, which ached constantly and dully. Iya Alake prepared the back room with clean cloths, boiled water stored in jars, and a herbal tea that she said was for the hour. And she taught Adana to recognize the signs, the difference between practice pain and real pain. Because with twins, the body gives warning earlier and more strongly. It was on a full moon night that Chief Obinna returned, and this time, without the smile. He was accompanied by 2 men Adana didn't know, and stood in the compound with a different posture, harder, more determined, of one who had grown tired of negotiating and came to deliver an ultimatum. He said, with a voice that no longer tried to be cordial, that there was a process underway to challenge the irregular occupation of the property, that Adana had 1 week to leave voluntarily before the authorities decided for her. It was a lie. Adana was almost certain it was a lie, but a lie spoken with authority in the middle of the night, by a man accompanied by 2 strangers, carries a weight that truth takes time to balance. She felt the twins move forcefully within her, as if they sensed the threat through her blood, and placed her hand on her belly in a gesture that was both protection and prayer. Before she could respond, footsteps were heard coming along the bush path. Iya Alake entered the compound with her bag on her arm and stopped short when she saw the men. In the last few weeks, with the birth so close, the old midwife had made a habit of passing by the farmstead every night before dark to check that Adana was well and that her body hadn't shown any signs. That night, like all the others, she had come by the bush path with the punctuality of one who takes her task seriously. She assessed the entire scene with those eyes that missed nothing. She walked until she stood beside Adana and remained there without saying a single word. She was just an old woman with a cloth bag, but there was in her shoulders a firmness that occupied space in a way the 3 men felt. Chief Obinna looked at the 2 women, looked at Adana's belly, and said that she would regret complicating things. He turned and left with the 2 men, and the sound of the horses mingled with the silence of the night until it disappeared. Iya Alake held Adana's arm and led her inside. She made lemongrass tea, placed it in her hand, and sat on the other side of the table with no hurry to leave. She said she would send an urgent message in the morning, that Chief Obinna had no power to remove anyone from there, and that the bluster of a rich man without legal papers was wind. It made noise, but it didn't truly knock down walls. Adana listened, holding the cup with both hands, feeling the warmth of the tea on her fingers and trying to believe it was true. But it was as she was about to respond that she felt the first pain. It wasn't the back pain she already knew, nor the discomfort that had accompanied her for weeks. It was different, lower, deeper, more insistent, a pain that came in waves and, when it passed, left her entire body waiting for the next. Adana closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and told Iya Alake that perhaps it would be good if she stayed close. The old midwife looked at her belly, and said she already knew it before entering the farmstead that night, as if God had sent her at exactly the right time, as he always did when one paid attention. The night closed in on the farmstead, as the pains grew stronger and closer. Iya Alake worked with the calm of one who has been through it so many times that tranquility had become a tool, the most important a midwife can have. She prepared everything in the back room, heated water on the hearth, organized the cloths and herbs, and kept telling Adana, in a voice firm and gentle at the same time, to breathe deeply when the pain came, to release the air slowly when it passed, that the body knew what it had to do, even when the mind doubted. Adana gripped the edge of the bed with her hands and endured the pain in the way women have always endured, the pain of the things that matter most, gritting her teeth, yielding when the body commanded, fighting when it was time to fight. The first cry tore through the dawn around 2 a.m., thin, strong, furious with life. Iya Alake smiled with that expression that was relief and celebration combined and said it was a boy. She wrapped the baby in a clean cloth, placed him on Adana's chest for an instant, and returned to work, because the second was coming right behind, and it came. 20 minutes later, another cry filled the room, sharper, more impatient, as if the girl were in a hurry to catch up with her brother who was already out. Iya Alake received her with the same firm hands, cleaned her, wrapped her, and placed her beside the first in Adana's arms, who looked at those two wrinkled, perfect faces with an expression no word in any language could translate. She named the boy Chike, the girl Adaeze. She had kept the two names for months, without telling anyone, as if naming them too soon was a risk she couldn't take. Now the names left her mouth softly, tasting the sound, and they fit perfectly, like things that had always been waiting to be spoken. Iya Alake left the room to give them the silence that moment demanded and went to tend the hearth. And Adana stayed there with her two children on her chest, listening to their breathing, feeling their weight, crying for the first time in months. Not from sadness, not from fear, but from that cry that comes when the body finally understands that the most difficult part has passed and what has arrived was good. But the most difficult had not passed. Morning brought a reality Adana had not foreseen. The twins nursed, but her milk was not enough for two. Chike, who was bigger and stronger, nursed vigorously, but Adaeze remained restless, crying with that weak cry of hunger, which is the most distressing sound a mother can hear. Adana tried everything she knew and everything Iya Alake taught her. Different positions, massage, compresses, tea to stimulate. But her body, exhausted from childbirth and months of hardship, simply could not feed two mouths. Adaeze cried, and each cry was a knife in Adana's chest, because there was no greater helplessness in the world than having a hungry child and not being able to satisfy that hunger. It was Iya Alake who said what had been there from the beginning, waiting to be seen. She looked at Adana with those eyes that carried decades of wisdom and said that the answer was in the corral. That Serena had plenty of milk, thick and strong milk, and that milking goats had fed babies since the world began, that she herself had been raised on goat's milk because her mother hadn't had enough milk, and that animal wasn't there by chance. She was there because God knew before anyone that milk would be needed. Adana looked out the room's window, saw Serena in the corral with her udder full, and understood in that instant, with a clarity that cut through her chest, that the goat who had lost her kid and the woman who didn't have enough milk for her own had been placed on the same farmstead for a reason that was greater than any coincidence. She rose with difficulty, still sore from childbirth. She went to the corral with the milking pot and sat beside Serena. The goat remained still, gentle as always, and the milk flowed thick and warm. Adana took it inside. Iya Alake warmed it carefully and gave it to Adaeze in an improvised small jar with a cloth over the mouth so the milk would drip slowly. The girl drank with an anxiety that was pure urgency, and when she finished and fell asleep with the peace of one whose belly is finally full, Adana rested her head against the wall and cried again. But this time it was gratitude. It was a gratitude so great that it wouldn't fit in her chest and needed to escape through her eyes. Serena, the goat who had been abandoned without her kid, began to nourish the children life had given Adana. Twice a day, morning and night, Adana milked carefully, and Serena's milk was what kept Adaeze strong and alive, while Adana's body slowly recovered. There was a beauty in this that went beyond what words could describe. A mother who lost her young, giving milk for the children of another mother who had no one. Iya Alake said, it was providence, that God wastes nothing, neither pain, nor milk, nor loneliness, and that everything that seems lost is only being kept for whoever will need it later. The first days with the twins were of an exhaustion Adana didn't know existed, a tiredness that went beyond the body and entered the soul, but it was mixed with a joy she also didn't know existed. Because no one teaches you the magnitude of love felt for a child until the child arrives. Iya Alake appeared every morning, helping, teaching, verifying that all three were well, and it was on the third day after childbirth, as Adana was nursing Chike on the veranda, while Adaeze slept inside a basket Iya Alake had brought, that the sound of hooves on the path made her heart race. But it wasn't Chief Obina, it was Emeka. He came alone, without his caravan, mounted on a borrowed horse, with a haste that didn't match his calm demeanor of all other days. He dismounted before fully stopping. He tied the animal to the post and walked to the veranda with long strides. He stopped when he saw Adana with the baby in her arms and stood there with an expression on his face he clearly hadn't planned to show. Iya Alake had sent him a message the previous day. Adana didn't know it. She hadn't asked for it, and she looked at the old midwife inside the house with a gaze that was both question and answer. Emeka stood looking at Chike in Adana's arms. Then he looked inside the house where Adeze slept in the basket, and something in his face changed in a way that had no turning back. It was the expression of a man carrying an old loss, who suddenly, without warning, stood before something that seemed to fill the exact shape of that void. He said nothing for a time that lasted longer than any words. Then he asked, with a voice hoarse as if controlling something big within his chest, if she needed anything. Adana said she needed firewood chopped, and he went to chop firewood as if it were the most important task he had ever received in his life. What neither of them knew that morning was that Chief Obinna had already taken the next step, and what came next would demand a courage from everyone that they had not yet had to demonstrate. Emeka didn't leave that day. He chopped firewood until the sun set, stacked it under the back roof with the meticulousness of one who orders the world with the work of his hands. And when he finished, he sat on the veranda, sweat dripping, and accepted the coffee Adana brought him without his asking. They stayed there in the twilight silence, he with the cup in his hands, and she with Adaize in her arms, listening to the crickets begin and Serena chewing grass in the corral. They didn't speak of Chief Obinna. They didn't speak of the future. They didn't speak of anything that weighed more than that moment could bear. And when night fell, Emeka said he would sleep in the back shed if she allowed it, because the journey back was long and the donkeys were resting in the village. Adana allowed it without argument, because to argue would have been to pretend she didn't want him to stay and she was already tired of carrying unnecessary weight. The next morning, Adana woke to the smell of freshly brewed coffee coming from the kitchen. She rose slowly, her body still sore from childbirth and the night broken by the alternating cries of the twins. And she found Emeka in the kitchen with the hearth lit, water boiling, and a cup already placed on the table as if he had done it all his life. He didn't say good morning with words, he said it with the gesture. And in that simplicity, there was an intimacy that had arrived without asking permission, and that seemed more true than any oath Adana had ever heard. Chike cried in the room, and Emeka made to go see. He stopped midway, as if realizing that might be crossing a line, and looked at Adana, waiting. She nodded, and he went and returned with the child in his arm with a clumsy and careful manner that was both amusing and beautiful, to see the manner of a man too large, carrying something too small and treating it as if it were the most important thing in the world. Iya Alake arrived that morning and found the scene without any surprise on her face, as if she already knew she would find exactly that. She sat on the veranda, drank the coffee Emeka served with the same naturalness with which he served it on the road, and then called Adana to speak in the compound, away from his ears. She said she had sent word to Segun's brother about Chief Obinna's schemes, and the response had come by word of mouth. From an acquaintance who had passed by the previous evening, Segun's brother was alarmed, said Segun had not authorized any sale, and that Chief Obinna was acting on his own. But he also said that Segun was in a difficult situation, living in a lodge room in the city, with his health broken and no will to return to the farmstead where he had lost everything. Iya Alake recounted this in the low voice of one who carries heavy information and knows she must deliver it carefully. And she ended by saying that someone needed to go to Segun before Chief Obinna went first and got what he wanted, taking advantage of the fragility of a broken man. Emeka listened to everything when Iya Alake repeated it on the veranda, with Adana beside her and the twins asleep in the room. He remained silent for a while, elbows on his knees and eyes on the compound earth, and then said he knew the city where Segun was. He passed through there with his caravan at least once a month. He knew the lodges, he knew the paths, he said he could go. He said it in the same voice with which he said he would chop firewood or water the donkeys, without weight, without drama, as if going to find a stranger in a distant city to resolve the fate of a woman he had no obligation to protect was simply the right thing to do. And it was. Adana looked at him and felt something settle within her chest with the solidity of things that are true, like a house foundation that doesn't tremble when the wind hits. Emeka left the next morning, before the sun, with a borrowed horse and the quiet determination of one who doesn't need to announce what he is going to do. Adana watched him leave the compound through the kitchen window with Adeze in her arms, and stood there for a while after he disappeared around the bend in the path, feeling his absence with an intensity that frightened her, because it was proof that that man had occupied a space within her that she didn't even know was empty. Iya Alake, who stayed on the farmstead during Emeka's absence, sleeping in the hammock in the living room and caring for the twins with the competence of one who made it her calling, said one of those nights, as the two drank lemongrass tea on the veranda, that Emeka was a rare man, that a man who cares without asking anything in return is the type God makes few of, because the mold is difficult and the material is expensive. Adana listened and did not reply, but she smiled in the darkness in a way that Iya Alake saw even without light. The days of waiting were long, in a way known only to those who have waited for something that can change everything. Adana cared for the twins, milked Serena, tended the garden, made cheese with the leftover milk, and tried not to think too much about what would happen if Emeka didn't find Segun, or if Segun didn't want to come, or if Chief Obinna acted before anyone. Chike and Adaize grew with the astonishing speed of their first days, gaining weight, gaining strength, filling the farmstead, with the sounds only newborns make, that mixture of cries, sighs, and silence that changes the air of any place. Serena continued to give milk with a generosity that seemed limitless, and Adana milked twice a day with an affection that went beyond the practical gesture, because that goat had become part of that improbable family in the same way that she herself had become part of that farmstead. Chief Obinna appeared on the 5th day, mid-morning, and this time he came alone. He brought no smile, no direct threat. He brought something worse. He brought a paper. He stood in the compound, dismounted his horse, and showed Adana a document he claimed was an eviction notice issued by the village authority, with a deadline of 3 days for her to leave with everything she had inside. Adana looked at the paper with her heart pounding in her ears and did not know in that instant if it was true or false. Iya Alake, who was inside the house, came out to the door and asked to see it. She looked at it carefully, slowly, turned it over on both sides, and then looked at Chief Obinna, with that expression only an old village woman knows how to make. The expression of one who has seen many lies in life and recognizes the scent from afar. She said that paper had no seal, no judge's signature, and no validity whatsoever, and that if Chief Obinna wanted to remove anyone from there, he would need much more than a sheet written by himself on his shop counter. Chief Obinna turned red, not from shame but from anger. The anger of one unaccustomed to encountering resistance where he expected to find fear. He said they were making a mistake, that he had means they couldn't imagine, that this wouldn't end there. Iya Alake replied that he should do what he believed he should, but that as long as she was alive in that region, no one would evict a mother with 2 newborns from a house out of land greed. She said it with a voice that didn't tremble once, and with a gaze that made Chief Obinna avert his own. The man mounted his horse and left without looking back, taking with him the useless paper and the certainty that these 2 women would not yield easily. Adana felt her legs tremble as the horse disappeared down the path. Iya Alake held her arm and told her to stay strong, that help was on its way, and that God had not brought her this far only to let her fall. Now Emeka returned on the 7th day, and he did not return alone. Adana was milking Serena in the corral when she heard the sound of 2 horses at the entrance to the farmstead. She rose slowly with the pot of milk in her hand, and her heart rising in her throat, and saw Emeka dismounting his horse beside a man she had never seen. He was a man in his 40s, thinner than he should be, with stooped shoulders and sunken eyes of one who has slept little for too long. His face was marked not by the sun, but by something from within, that kind of tiredness that isn't of the body, but of the soul. Adana knew who he was before any introduction, because there was in that man's gaze, when he stopped at the entrance to the compound and stood looking at the house, the compound, the garden, a pain so visible that it was like reading a letter written in large script. Segun was back on the farmstead he had abandoned, and what he found there was not what he expected. It wasn't the walls that held Funmilayo's memory covered in dust and silence. They were open windows, swept floors, a lit hearth, the smell of coffee and lemongrass in the air. It was a living garden, where before only weeds had remained. It was baby clothes drying on the line. It was a white goat grazing peacefully in the corral, the same goat he believed had died long ago. Segun walked through the farmstead slowly, his hands in his pockets and his eyes moist, looking at every corner like one who re-encounters a beloved face that has changed, but is still recognizable beneath the changes. He entered the kitchen, saw the cup on the table, the hearth with embers, the herbs hanging to dry on the wall. He entered the back room and stopped at the door when he saw the basket where the twins slept side by side with that absolute peace of newborns who do not yet know the weight of the world. He stood there for a time no one measured. Emeka was on the veranda standing in silence. Iya, Alake was in the kitchen, quiet, and Adana was in the compound with the pot of milk still in her hand, waiting without knowing what to expect. When Segun emerged from the room, his face was wet and his expression changed, as if something that had been locked inside him all that time had finally found its way out. He walked to the compound where Adana was and stood in front of her without saying anything for a moment. Then he said, his voice choked as one speaking over a lump in his throat, that he had believed that Farmstead was dead, that he had left because he couldn't look at those walls without seeing Funmilayo in every corner, without hearing her voice in the kitchen, without smelling her in the room where everything happened, and that he had believed abandoning it was the only way to bear the pain, but that he was wrong, that farmstead was not dead, it was waiting. And that Adana had done what he hadn't had the courage to do. She had brought life back to a place he had let die of sadness. Adana listened to every word with an attention that went beyond hearing. She saw in that man a pain she recognized, not identical to hers, but made of the same fabric, the pain of one who lost their footing and had to learn to walk on different ground. She didn't say everything was fine because it wasn't, and simplifying the pain of others is a disrespect disguised as kindness. She only said that the farmstead belonged to him and that she had known that from the first day. Segun looked at her. He looked towards her belly, which was no longer a belly, but two children sleeping inside the house. He looked at Serena in the corral and said that the farmstead was his on paper, but that what was there at that moment belonged to her, that he had come to resolve two things. The first was Chief Obina, and the second was to ensure that Adana never again had to fear losing that roof. Segun went to the village the next day. Emeka went with him because it was not a time for anyone to go alone. They went to the local council office, and Segun formally registered that the property was not for sale, that there were authorized inhabitants on the farmstead, and that any attempt at negotiation by third parties was null and without consent. Then they went to Chief Obina's shop, and Segun, who was a quiet man of few words like Emeka, told the merchant, in a voice that didn't need to be loud to be firm, that if he ever set foot on that property again, or bothered anyone living there, the next conversation would be with a lawyer from the big city whom Segun's brother had already consulted. Chief Obina listened with a locked jaw and did not respond. Not because he had nothing to say, but because he recognized, perhaps for the first time, that he had encountered a wall that would not yield. The news spread through the region with the speed that news has in the countryside, fast for bad news and slow for good. But this time it was the other way around. Iya Alake made sure to tell anyone who would listen that Segun had returned, that the farmstead was legally occupied, and that Chief Obina had received a definitive no. The true version gained ground over the gossip and Chief Obina's silence. After that day, it confirmed what everyone already suspected, that he had bluffed from beginning to end, and his bluff had been cold. Segun stayed on the farmstead, not because he had planned it, but because it happened, in the way right things happen when one stops forcing and lets life find its place. The first days he slept in the back shed, quiet, working alongside Adana and Emeka, not speaking much, rediscovering every corner of that land with the slowness of one who is relearning to be in a place that caused him pain. But it was Serena who made the difference. The first time Segun entered the corral after returning, and the goat approached him and leaned her muzzle against his hand, the man stood there for a long time, caressing the animal that had been a gift for Funmilayo, and that had survived abandonment in the same way that the farmstead had survived, waiting. Iya Alake later said, it was at that moment that Segun decided to stay, because Serena had done what no words could. She had shown him that the love he had for Funmilayo didn't need to be erased for life to continue. It only needed a new place to exist. The months passed with the speed that time has when life is full of worthwhile things. Chike and Adaeze grew strong, nourished by Serena's milk and the care of an entire village of people who didn't share blood ties, but had something that is sometimes stronger. Segun became a kind of unofficial grandfather, carrying the twins in his arms with a clumsy care that became natural over time, building wooden toys with hands that once only knew how to build fences and furrows. The garden doubled in size, with everyone's work together, and the first sales of cheese and vegetables at the village market brought in a small sum of money that Adana kept in a jar in the kitchen drawer, with the seriousness of one who had never in her life had control over a single penny of her own. Emeka stopped traveling. He didn't announce it. He made no speeches. There was no solemn moment of decision. Simply his departures became shorter, his returns quicker, his excuses to stay more frequent, until one ordinary day he was there in the morning, in the afternoon, in the evening, and the next day too. and no one asked why, and he didn't explain, because it wasn't necessary. He sold his donkeys to a younger man who was just starting in the trade, and with the money, he bought new tools, seeds, wire for the fence, and a wooden cradle he made himself for the twins with a carpenter's skill no one knew he possessed. The conversation between him and Adana never happened with grand words. It happened one moonlit night, the two sitting on the veranda with the twins asleep and Serena chewing cud in the corral when he said he wanted to stay. Not to stay for now, not to stay until he sorted out his life. To truly stay. He said it looking straight ahead at the compound silvered by the moon, with that direct voice that was his only way of saying difficult things. Adana remained silent, holding her cup of coffee, feeling the weight of those words and the weight of the answer forming within her. She said she was staying, but that she needed him to understand one thing, that she had come from a life where she had no voice, where she had no space, where she had learned to shrink herself to fit into the world of others, and that she could not, and did not want to, return to any version of that, no matter how beautiful it seemed. Emeka turned his face towards her and said he knew, that he had seen it in her from the first time he stopped at the farmstead to water his donkeys and found an 8-month pregnant woman caring for a lonely goat as if she were caring for the whole world. He said the farmstead was hers as much as anyone's, and that what he wanted to build needed both of them standing tall, not one in the other's shadow. Adana listened to all of this, weighing each word, searching for the trap life had taught her to expect. She found none, and there, on that veranda, with the scent of lemongrass in the air and the stars above the roof, she let the fear dissipate with the night wind. Life on the farmstead gradually organized itself, as things built with honest hands and the patience of one who is not in a hurry to harvest what they have sown always do. The house received curtains Adana sewed with fabric bought at the market, pots of herbs at the entrance that perfumed anyone who arrived, and the facade painted with white lime that Segun prepared, and Emeka applied one sunny Sunday, transforming those walls into a reflection of what was happening within them. The garden grew to become a reference in the region, with beans, pumpkin, tomatoes, coriander, spring onions, and Iya Alake's herbs, which Adana learned to cultivate and use with the same wisdom the old midwife imparted in every visit. Serena continued to give milk with that constancy that was almost a miracle, and the twins grew attached to her as if the goat were part of the family. Because she was. Iya Alake kept coming 2 or 3 times a week with her bag on her arm and that discreet smile of one who looks at life and sees that every now and then things fit together the way they should. She was not a woman to say she was right, but her eyes told it every time she saw Emeka carrying Chike on his shoulder, while Adana planted with Adeze tied to her back with a wrapper, and Segun sat on the veranda carving a toy with a knife and whistling a song no one knew, but that sounded like something that had returned from afar. One Sunday afternoon, with the sun painting the compound golden and the twins crawling across the yard, with that determination of those who want to know every inch of the world, Adana stopped in the middle of the garden with her hoe in hand and looked around. She saw the white house with open windows. She saw the old mango tree laden with fruit. She saw Serena grazing with her usual meekness. She saw Iya Alake on the veranda with tea in hand. She saw Segun on the wooden bench with Adieza in his arms. She saw Emeka fixing the back fence with his sleeves rolled up and sweat on his brow, and she thought of the morning she left that lodge with an old travel bag and an 8-month belly and no certainty other than that she couldn't stop walking. She thought of the doors that closed, of the long journey, of her aching feet, of the fear she didn't want to articulate. She thought of the evening when she saw that roof among the trees and of the goat that bleated alone in a corral, waiting for someone who never arrived. And she understood with that clarity that only comes when time does the favor of showing the complete picture, that none of that had been chance, that the farmstead had not been an accident on the road, but the destiny that was waiting for her, that the goat who lost her young and the woman who had no one were placed on the same ground, so that neither would be alone, and that the family she now had, made of people who did not share blood, but shared something that is sometimes stronger, had been born there on that farmstead, in the same way that things that truly matter are born slowly, with pain, with work, and with a beauty that only those who have been through the worst can truly see. New beginnings are born from the dusty ground, from an old travel bag carried by hands that didn't know where they were going, from a goat that lost 1 kid and found 2. There are strengths that only appear when one believes they have lost everything, and places that seem forgotten by the world, but are only being kept by God for whoever will need them at the right moment. Adana didn't choose that farmstead. It was the farmstead that chose her. And perhaps life works like that with everything that truly matters. You don't find the path finds you. If this story touched something within you, share it with anyone who needs to hear that the milk of kindness never dries up, that love is born in the most improbable places, and that sometimes the family you need is the one you build with your own hands. Until the next story.